Margaret Collins never imagined that the words coming from her own son's mouth would be the ones to seal his financial fate forever. Standing outside the country club's oak-paneled dining room, she froze as 22-year-old Bradley's voice carried through the slightly open door. "Don't worry about it, guys. She's almost gone anyway. Once that old bag kicks the bucket, I'll have access to everything." The laughter that followed felt like ice water in her veins. In that moment, the 73-year-old pharmaceutical heiress made a decision that would change both their lives forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Margaret had always prided herself on being a woman who built her empire from nothing. Born in a small town outside Cleveland, she'd clawed her way through medical school in the 1970s when female doctors were still a rarity. Her breakthrough came in developing a revolutionary arthritis medication that transformed the lives of millions. By 40, she owned Collins Pharmaceuticals, and by 60, her net worth had climbed to over $200 million. She'd married young to Robert Collins, a charming investment banker who seemed supportive of her ambitions. Their marriage produced one child, Bradley, born when Margaret was 51 after years of fertility struggles. Robert died in a car accident when Bradley was just 8, leaving Margaret to raise their son alone while running a multinational corporation. Margaret threw herself into being both mother and CEO. She attended every school play, every soccer game, and every parent-teacher conference, even when board meetings ran late or manufacturing crises demanded her attention. She hired the best tutors, sent Bradley to elite private schools, and made sure he had everything she'd never had growing up. The boy she remembered was sweet and curious, always asking questions about her work and seeming genuinely interested in the science behind her medications. During summer breaks, she'd bring him to the office, where he'd sit in the corner of conference rooms, sketching in notebooks while she negotiated deals. Those were some of her happiest memories, just the two of them against the world. But somewhere along the way, that curious little boy had vanished. Bradley had struggled through college, switching majors 3 times before finally graduating with a degree in communications that Margaret suspected he'd barely earned. He'd moved back home afterward, claiming he needed time to find himself and explore his options. That was 4 years ago. Margaret had been patient. She understood that growing up as the son of a powerful woman couldn't have been easy. She'd given him space, offered him internships at the company that he'd declined, and continued providing for his every need. His monthly allowance of $15,000 covered his luxury apartment in downtown Chicago, his BMW, his designer clothes, and his frequent trips to Vegas with friends. She'd told herself that he was young, that he'd eventually mature, and find his direction. She'd watched other wealthy families struggle with entitled children, and had believed, hoped, that Bradley would be different. After all, she'd raised him to understand the value of hard work, hadn't she? The doubts had started creeping in over the past year. Bradley rarely called unless he needed money for something. When she'd suggest family dinners, he'd show up late, spend most of the meal on his phone, and leave early. The few times she'd tried to discuss his future or suggest he consider working with the charitable foundation she'd established, he'd brushed her off with vague promises about getting serious soon. Last month, she'd overheard him on the phone, telling someone that he didn't need to worry about a career because he'd inherit everything eventually. The casual way he'd said it had bothered her, but she'd convinced herself she was being oversensitive. Margaret had tried to maintain traditions that kept them connected. One of those was their monthly lunch at the Riverside Country Club, where she'd been a member for over 20 years. These lunches had become increasingly one-sided conversations, with Margaret sharing updates about the company or her charity work, while Bradley responded with grunts and nods, his attention clearly elsewhere. Today had started like any other. She'd arrived at the club early, as was her habit, and had gone to freshen up in the ladies' room before their scheduled meeting. As she walked back toward the dining room, she'd heard familiar voices coming from the private room she'd reserved. Through the partially open door, she could see Bradley sitting with 3 of his friends, young men she recognized from various family gatherings over the years. She'd been about to announce her presence when the conversation stopped her cold. "Dude, you're so lucky," one of them was saying. "My parents are still young and healthy. I'm going to be waiting forever for my inheritance." "Yeah, well, at least your dad didn't cut your allowance," another chimed in. "Mine decided I need to learn responsibility or some bullshit. I'm actually having to work part-time now." That's when Bradley had leaned back in his chair with that confident smirk she'd seen too many times lately. "Don't worry about it, guys. She's almost gone anyway. Once that old bag kicks the bucket, I'll have access to everything. Collins Pharmaceuticals, the real estate portfolio, the investment accounts, all of it. And trust me, when that happens, we'll all be living like kings." Margaret's hand had instinctively gone to her chest, where her heart was suddenly pounding. She'd remained frozen, hoping she'd misheard, hoping there would be some clarification that would make his words less cruel. Instead, Bradley had continued. "I mean, she's already 73. How much longer can she really have? She's been slowing down lately. I can see it. And honestly, it's about time. I'm tired of having to ask permission for everything. Tired of her lectures about building character and earning my place. Once she's out of the picture, I can finally live my life." The laughter that followed had been the worst part. Not shocked laughter or uncomfortable chuckling, but genuine amusement. These young men, whom she'd welcomed into her home, whom she'd treated with kindness and generosity whenever they'd visited, were laughing at the prospect of her death. "What's the first thing you'll do?" one of them had asked. "Sell that boring-ass pharmaceutical company," Bradley had replied without hesitation. "I mean, who wants to deal with manufacturing pills and dealing with FDA regulations? I'll sell it to the highest bidder and invest the money in something fun. Maybe buy a chain of nightclubs or get into crypto seriously, something that doesn't require me to pretend I care about helping sick people." Margaret had heard enough. She'd backed away from the door quietly, her mind reeling. Everything she'd built, everything she'd sacrificed for, everything she'd hoped to pass down to continue helping others. Bradley saw it all as nothing more than an inconvenience standing between him and his ideal lifestyle. She'd spent 43 years building Collins, pharmaceuticals from a small research lab into a company that employed over 8,000 people and provided life-saving medications to millions around the world. She'd created the Collins Foundation, which funded medical research and provided free medications to low-income patients. Her life's work had meaning, purpose, impact, and her son couldn't wait for her to die so he could destroy it all. Margaret had walked to her car in a daze, her hands shaking as she'd fumbled with her keys. She'd sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to process what she'd heard. Part of her wanted to march back inside and confront him immediately. Part of her wanted to pretend it had never happened, to give him another chance to prove he wasn't the person those words suggested he was. But the rational part of her mind, the same analytical thinking that had built her empire, was already calculating the implications. If Bradley truly felt this way about her and her life's work, what would happen when she was actually gone? How many people would lose their jobs when he sold the company to whoever offered the most money, regardless of their intentions? How many patients would suffer when her charitable programs were discontinued? She'd driven home to her estate in Lake Forest, the 30-room mansion that had felt too big since Robert's death, but that she'd kept because Bradley had grown up there. She'd walked through rooms filled with family photos, awards from medical organizations, and thank you letters from patients whose lives had been changed by her medications. For the first time in decades, Margaret Collins felt truly alone. Margaret spent the rest of that afternoon in her home office, surrounded by financial documents and legal files that suddenly felt heavier than they ever had before. The mahogany desk that had witnessed decades of crucial business decisions now served as the stage for what might be the most important choice of her life. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Harrison Webb, her estate attorney for the past 15 years. Harrison had helped her structure her will, establish her charitable foundation, and navigate the complex legal requirements of leaving a pharmaceutical empire to her only heir. He was also one of the few people who knew the true extent of her wealth. "Margaret, what a pleasant surprise!" Harrison's voice was warm when he answered. "How can I help you today?" "Harrison, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning, and I need you to bring every document related to my estate planning and Bradley's inheritance." There was a pause. Harrison had been practicing law for over 30 years, and he could read between the lines of his client's requests. "Is everything all right?" "Let's just say I've had some revelations about family loyalty that require immediate legal attention." They arranged to meet at 8 the following morning at Harrison's downtown office. Margaret spent the evening going through her personal files, reviewing every financial arrangement she'd made for Bradley over the years. The numbers were staggering. Beyond his monthly allowance, she'd paid for his college tuition, his apartment, lease, his car payments, his credit card bills, and countless other expenses that she'd categorized as investments in his future. She'd also discovered several things that made her stomach turn. Credit card statements showed thousands of dollars spent at high-end strip clubs, luxury watches he'd never mentioned owning, and payments to something called Elite Escort Services. There were hotel bills from Las Vegas that coincided with weekends when he'd told her he was studying with friends or attending networking events. The final straw came when she found a loan application he'd submitted 3 months ago, using her company as collateral without her knowledge. The application had been denied, but the audacity of attempting it revealed just how entitled he'd become. He'd been planning to leverage her life's work for gambling money. Margaret didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in her late husband's study, looking at photos of Bradley as a child. There was one from his 8th birthday party, just after Robert's funeral, where Bradley was hugging her tightly, both of them still in mourning clothes. His eyes had been so full of love and trust then. What had happened to that little boy? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. By dawn, she'd made her decision. Harrison's office occupied the top, 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. Margaret had always found the view calming, but today she barely noticed the morning light dancing across the water. Harrison greeted her with his usual professional warmth, but his expression grew serious when he saw the determination in her eyes. "Margaret, in all our years of working together, I've never seen you look quite like this." "What happened?" she told him everything. The overheard conversation, Bradley's casual cruelty, and her discoveries about his secret spending. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his yellow legal pad. "I want to change everything," Margaret concluded. "I want Bradley removed from my will entirely." Harrison set down his pen carefully. "Margaret, I understand you're hurt and angry. These revelations about Bradley must be devastating, but completely disinheriting your only child is a decision that can't be undone. Have you considered other options? Perhaps reducing his inheritance, or placing it in a trust with strict conditions." "Harrison, my son referred to me as an old bag and said he couldn't wait for me to die. He wants to sell my company, destroy everything I've built, and use the money for his own pleasure. He's not just ungrateful, he's dangerous to everything I care about." She pulled out a folder she'd prepared that morning. "I've done the research. I want to establish a new charitable trust that will receive the bulk of my estate. The Collins Medical Foundation will be expanded to not just fund research and provide free medications, but to also offer scholarships for underprivileged students entering medical fields." Harrison reviewed her handwritten notes. The scope was impressive. She wanted to create a program that would provide full medical school scholarships to students from low-income families, fund research into rare diseases that pharmaceutical companies often ignored because they weren't profitable, and establish free clinics in underserved communities. This is beautiful work, Margaret. But are you certain you want to leave Bradley? Nothing? Margaret's jaw tightened. I want to leave him exactly what he's earned through his own efforts. Nothing. There could be legal challenges. He could contest the will. Let him try. I have recordings. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Recordings? Margaret pulled out her smartphone. I went back to the country club yesterday evening. I told them I'd left something in the private dining room and needed to retrieve it. While I was there, I activated the recording app on my phone and left it in the room. Then I called Bradley and asked him to meet me there to discuss something important. She played the recording. Bradley's voice was clear as he spoke to his friends again, having apparently returned to continue their conversation. This time, the content was even worse. I'm telling you guys, it's going to be like Christmas when she finally croaks. Did you know she's sitting on over $200 million? And that's just the liquid assets. The company's worth at least 5 times that. I've already been talking to some investment guys about what we could do with that kind of money. One of his friends asked, "What if she finds out you're planning all this?" Bradley's laugh was cold. She won't. The old lady's so desperate for her. My approval that she believes whatever I tell her. I just have to keep playing the dutiful son for a little while longer. Smile, nod, show up for family dinners, and pretend I care about her boring charity work. It's not that hard. Doesn't it? Bother you at all? Another voice asked. I mean, she's your mom. Look, she had her life. She built her little empire, got recognition, won awards. Now it's my turn. I didn't ask to be born into this responsibility, and I'm sure as hell not going to let guilt keep me from enjoying what should be mine. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, with Bradley detailing his plans to liquidate her assets, sell her properties, and use the money to fund a lifestyle of luxury and excess. He talked about buying a mansion in Miami, a yacht, and maybe getting into the entertainment business by funding nightclubs and restaurants. Harrison sat in stunned silence as the recording ended. My God, Margaret, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Be thorough. I want this will restructured in a way that will stand up to any legal challenge he might mount, and I want it done quickly. They spent the next 4 hours going through every aspect of her estate. Margaret's instructions were detailed and precise. The house would be donated to a nonprofit that provided temporary housing for families of patients receiving long-term medical treatment. Her art collection would go to local museums. Her jewelry, except for a few sentimental pieces that would go to her longtime housekeeper, would be sold with proceeds benefiting the foundation. Most importantly, Collins Pharmaceuticals would be transitioned into a benefit corporation structure, with leadership appointed by the foundation's board of directors. This would ensure that the company's mission of developing life-saving medications would continue, while profits above a reasonable operating margin would fund charitable programs. What about Bradley's current allowance and expenses? Harrison asked. Cut off immediately. Today. Margaret, that might trigger suspicion. If he realizes something has changed, he might become more aggressive in his behavior toward you. She considered this. You're right. Continue his allowance for now. But I want you to start documenting everything. Every expense, every request, every interaction. If he challenges the will, I want a complete record of his character and his spending habits. Harrison nodded, making notes. What about personal items? Family photos? Your husband's belongings? Things with sentimental value? There's a storage unit I'll rent. I'll move Robert's things there, along with family photos and mementos from Bradley's childhood. After I die, the storage unit information will be given to him. He can choose what to do with those memories. As they worked through the details, Margaret felt a strange sense of relief washing over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't making decisions based on what Bradley might want or need. She was free to direct her wealth toward causes that truly mattered to her. There's one more thing, she said as they were finishing up. I want to establish a scholarship specifically for students who have overcome significant personal hardships, students who didn't have advantages handed to them but fought for their education anyway. That's a beautiful gesture. It's more than a gesture. It's a statement about what I value. I built my wealth through hard work, determination, and a genuine desire to help people. I want that legacy to continue through people who share those values, not through someone who sees my life's work as nothing more than a lottery ticket. Harrison began drafting the new documents immediately. The legal language was complex, but the intent was clear. Margaret Collins was taking control of her legacy and ensuring that her wealth would continue to serve humanity long after she was gone. As she left Harrison's office that afternoon, Margaret felt lighter than she had in months. She'd spent so many years trying to mold Bradley into someone worthy of inheriting her empire that she'd lost sight of what really mattered. Now, freed from that impossible task, she could focus on creating something truly meaningful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Bradley. "Hey, Mom, can you transfer an extra $5,000 this month? Planning a trip to Miami with the guys." Margaret stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "We'll discuss it at dinner tomorrow night. Can you come by the house at 7?" It was time for the next phase of her plan. Bradley thought he was playing a long game, waiting patiently for his inheritance while managing his mother's expectations. But Margaret Collins hadn't built a pharmaceutical empire by being naive about human nature. She'd learned to read people, to understand their motivations, and to plan several moves ahead. Tomorrow night, she would begin teaching her son what it really meant to underestimate Margaret Collins. Margaret spent the following day orchestrating what she privately called Operation Reality Check. She had 24 hours before Bradley's dinner visit, and she intended to use every minute strategically. Her first call was to Detective Ray Martinez, a former Chicago police officer who now ran a private investigation firm specializing in financial fraud. Margaret had used his services 3 years earlier when she suspected a Collins Pharmaceuticals executive of embezzling company funds. Ray had proven to be thorough, discreet, and devastatingly effective. "Mrs. Collins, it's good to hear from you again. How can I help?" "Ray, I need a complete background investigation on someone. Financial records, social media activity, associations, spending patterns, legal issues, everything. Corporate or personal matter?" Margaret hesitated for just a moment. "Personal. The subject is my son." Ray's professionalism never wavered. "I'll need his full name, date of birth, social security number, and any account information you have access to as his financial supporter." Within 2 hours, Ray had assembled a preliminary report that made Margaret's stomach churn. Bradley's financial irresponsibility was far worse than she'd discovered on her own. He had 3 credit cards she didn't know about, all maxed out. He'd taken cash advances against his monthly allowance, essentially borrowing against money he hadn't received yet. Most troubling, he'd been making regular payments to someone named Vincent Torres, who Ray's initial research suggested might be connected to illegal gambling operations. "Mrs. Collins, I recommend we dig deeper into this Torres connection. If your son is involved with loan sharks or underground gambling, he could be in serious danger." "How serious?" "People who borrow from these operations and can't pay back often face physical threats. Your son might be counting on his inheritance not just for lifestyle reasons, but for survival." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. If Bradley was in debt to dangerous people, his eagerness for her death might be driven by desperation rather than just greed. That made him potentially more dangerous to her as well. "Continue the investigation, Ray, and add personal security to your services. I want someone watching my house, my office, and monitoring my daily activities. Are you concerned for your physical safety?" Margaret thought about the recording she'd made, about Bradley's casual dismissal of her life, about the possibility that he might owe money to people who wouldn't hesitate to harm an elderly woman to collect a debt. "Yes, I am." Her second call was to Dr. Patricia Hernandez, her personal physician and close friend. Patricia had been her doctor for over a decade and knew Margaret's health status better than anyone. "Patricia, I need a favor. I want you to conduct a complete physical examination and cognitive assessment, and I want the results documented in the most detailed medical report you've ever written." "Margaret, are you feeling unwell? You sound stressed." "I'm feeling fine, which is exactly what I need officially documented. I have reason to believe someone might challenge my mental competency in the near future, and I want medical proof that I'm in full command of my faculties." Patricia scheduled the appointment for the following morning, promising to have the comprehensive report ready within 48 hours. Margaret's third call was to her longtime housekeeper, Elena Rodriguez. Elena had worked for the Collins family for 12 years, ever since Bradley was 10 years old. She'd watched him grow up, and Margaret trusted her judgment about people. "Elena, I need to ask you some questions about Bradley, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Mrs. Collins, you sound upset. Is everything okay?" "I'm trying to determine if everything is okay. Has Bradley ever asked you about my daily routines? My schedule, my appointments, when I go to bed, when I wake up?" There was a long pause. "Yes, ma'am. Over the past few months, he's been asking more questions. He wanted to know when you take your evening medications, whether you keep cash in the house, and if you ever work late in your office alone." Margaret's blood ran cold. "Did he say why he was asking?" "He said he was worried about your safety, that he wanted to make sure you weren't taking unnecessary risks at your age." "What else, Elena?" "Last week he asked me if I had keys to your office safe. He said he was concerned that if something happened to you, no one would know how to access your important documents." Margaret thanked Elena and asked her to start keeping a detailed log of any interactions with Bradley, including dates, times, and exact conversations. She also asked Elena to change the locks on the house and to install new security cameras in areas that weren't already covered. By evening, Margaret felt like she was preparing for a battle rather than a family dinner. She'd spent the day uncovering evidence that Bradley wasn't just an ungrateful heir. He was potentially a threat to her safety. The gambling debts, the questions about her routines, the interest in her security measures, all painted a picture of someone who might be planning more than just waiting for a natural inheritance. At exactly 7 o'clock, Bradley's BMW pulled into the circular driveway. Margaret watched from her office window as he sat in the car for several minutes, talking animatedly on his phone. When he finally walked to the front door, his demeanor was different from usual. Instead of his typical casual slouch, he seemed alert, almost nervous. Elena let him in, and Margaret heard him greeting her with unusual enthusiasm, asking about her family and complimenting her cooking. This newfound interest in the household staff was another red flag. "Mom?" Bradley called out as he entered the house. "In the dining room, dear." Margaret had asked Elena to prepare Bradley's favorite meal, prime rib with roasted potatoes and her famous apple pie for dessert. She wanted this conversation to happen in a comfortable, familiar setting where Bradley would feel secure enough to reveal his true thoughts. He entered the dining room with a smile that looked practiced. "Hey, Mom. Thanks for making dinner. It smells incredible here." "Elena outdid herself tonight. Sit down. Let's eat." For the first 20 minutes, their conversation was remarkably normal. Bradley asked about her work, mentioned a book he was reading, and even inquired about her charity foundation. His performance was so convincing that Margaret almost wondered if she'd misunderstood the recordings. Then she decided to test him. "Bradley, I've been thinking about succession planning for Collins Pharmaceuticals. You're my only heir, and I want to make sure you're prepared for the responsibility when the time comes." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Oh, well, you know I'm still figuring out exactly what I want to do with my career. I understand, but whether you work in the company or not, you'll eventually own it. I think it would be good for you to start learning about the business side, the board meetings, the regulatory requirements. the research and development process. Bradley set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. Mom, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but honestly, I'm not sure the pharmaceutical business is for me. I mean, it's great what you've built, but I have different interests. What kind of interests? I don't know yet. Maybe something in entertainment or hospitality. Something more dynamic. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. I see. And what would happen to Collins Pharmaceuticals if you're not interested in running it? Well, couldn't we just sell it? I mean, if it's as valuable as everyone says, there would probably be lots of companies interested in acquiring it. There it was. The casual suggestion that betrayed his complete disregard for everything she'd built. Bradley, Collins Pharmaceuticals, employs over 8,000 people. We provide medications that millions of people depend on to stay alive. The company isn't just a financial asset, it's a responsibility. He shrugged. I get that, Mom, but business is business. If someone else can run it more efficiently, isn't that better for everyone? And what about the Collins Foundation, the charitable work we do? That's nice and all, but once you're gone, wouldn't it make more sense to focus on securing the family's financial future first? I mean, charity is great, but family comes first, right? Margaret felt a familiar surge of disappointment, but this time it was mixed with something else. A cold, analytical clarity. Bradley wasn't just revealing his priorities. He was essentially confirming everything she'd heard in his conversations with his friends. You know, Bradley, I'm curious about something. Do you ever think about what my death will mean to you emotionally? As my son. The question seemed to catch him off guard. What do you mean? I mean, when I die, you'll lose your mother, the person who raised you, who's been there for you your entire life. Do you think about grieving that loss, or are you only focused on the financial aspects? Bradley looked uncomfortable for the first time during the meal. Of course I'll be sad, Mom, but death is a natural part of life, and you've always taught me to be practical about things. Have I? When did I teach you to be practical about death? Well, just in general. You always said I should think ahead and plan for the future. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Bradley, are you in some kind of financial trouble? His response was too quick, too defensive. No. Why would you ask that? Because lately, you seem more interested in money than usual. Your questions about the business, your requests for extra allowance money, your interest in the value of my assets. I'm not in trouble. I just think it's smart to understand our family's financial situation. Our family's financial situation? Well, yeah. I mean, eventually it'll be my responsibility to manage everything, right? Margaret stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where she'd taught Bradley to ride his first bicycle 20 years ago. Bradley? Do you love me? Of course I do, Mom. What kind of question is that? It's a simple question that deserves a simple answer. Do you love me as your mother, independent of anything I might be able to provide for you financially? There was a long pause. When Bradley finally answered, his voice was quieter. Yes, I love you. Then help me understand something. If you love me, why does our conversation always come back to money? Why are you so focused on what happens after I die instead of enjoying the time we have together while I'm alive? Bradley shifted in his chair. I don't know what you want me to say. Mom? I want you to be honest with me. Are you hoping I'll die soon? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Bradley's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been guilt. That's a horrible thing to ask. It's a horrible thing to wonder about your own son. Margaret returned to her seat and looked directly at Bradley. I'm 73 years old, but I'm in excellent health. My doctor says I could easily live another 15 to 20 years. How does that make you feel? Bradley's composure was starting to crack. I don't understand why we're having this conversation. We're having this conversation because I need to know who you really are. Are you my son who wants me around for as long as possible? Or are you someone who sees me as an obstacle to getting what you want? You're being paranoid. Am I? Then explain to me why you've been asking Elena about my daily routines, my medication schedule, and my security arrangements. Bradley's face went pale. I was worried about your safety. Or you were planning something. Planning what? Mom, you're scaring me. Margaret pulled out her phone and placed it on the table between them. Bradley, I'm going to play you a recording. I want you to listen to it carefully, and then I want you to explain to me what kind of son says these things about his mother. She pressed play, and Bradley's own voice filled the dining room, casual and cruel as he talked about waiting for her to die so he could inherit her fortune. The color drained from Bradley's face as his own voice echoed through the dining room. Margaret watched him carefully, noting every micro-expression, every tell that revealed his inner panic. This was the moment she'd been building toward. The confrontation that would determine not just his future, but potentially her own safety. Turn. It off, Bradley said quietly when the recording reached the part where he called her an old bag. Margaret didn't move. The recording continued, playing his laughter as he discussed selling her company and his excitement about her impending death. Turn it off! Bradley's voice was louder now, more desperate. Still, Margaret let it play. She wanted him to hear every cruel word, every casual dismissal of her life and legacy. When the recording finally ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Bradley's hands were shaking. Where did you get that? Does it matter? What matters is that I now know exactly what you think of me and what you're planning for my life's work. Mom, you don't understand. Those guys, they were just what? Forcing you to say those things? Putting words in your mouth? Margaret's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Bradley, I heard multiple recordings, different days, different conversations, all with the same theme. You can't wait for me to die. Bradley stood up abruptly, beginning to pace around the dining room. You were spying on me? Recording my private conversations? I was protecting myself from someone who apparently sees me as nothing more than an inheritance waiting to happen. That's not true, isn't it? Then explain Vincent Torres. Bradley stopped pacing. The name hit him like a physical blow, and Margaret could see fear replacing the anger in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Vincent Torres, the man you've been making payments to for the past 8 months. The man connected to illegal gambling operations. The man you owe $47,000 to. Bradley sank back into his chair, his bravado completely gone. How do you know about Vincent? I know about everything, Bradley. The secret credit cards, the cash advances, the trips to underground poker games in the warehouse district. I know. You've been borrowing against your allowance to make minimum payments to Torres, and I know he's been pressuring you for the full amount. Margaret pulled out a folder that Detective Martinez had delivered that afternoon. I also know that Vincent Torres has a history of violence. 3 assault charges, 1 conviction for extortion, and suspected involvement in 2 cases where debtors ended up in the hospital. Bradley's face was ashen. Mom, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you've put yourself in debt to a dangerous criminal? Can you explain why you've been asking Elena about my security routines and medication schedule? Can you explain why you thought it was appropriate to joke with your friends about my death while you're potentially planning to speed it along? I would never hurt you. Bradley's voice cracked. I'm not a killer. But you're desperate, and desperate people do things they never thought they were capable of. Margaret opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. They showed Bradley entering and leaving various locations. A back alley poker game, Vincent. Torres's pawn shop, a loan shark operation disguised as a check-cashing business. Detective Martinez has been very thorough. He's documented your activities, your associates, and your debts. He's also discovered that Vincent Torres has been asking questions about me. About my routines, my health, my security arrangements. Apparently, he's very interested in when I might die and how quickly you'd have access to your inheritance. Bradley stared at the photographs in horror. He said he was just making conversation when he asked about you. Did he? Or was he planning something? Maybe an accident that would look natural? Maybe a home invasion that went wrong? How exactly were you planning to pay him back, Bradley? I wasn't planning anything. I just thought, I hoped, that maybe you'd help me out if I asked. Help you? Out to the tune of $47,000 for gambling debts? Money that would go directly to a criminal who's now taking an interest in my personal life. Margaret stood and walked to the china cabinet where she kept family photos. She picked up one of Bradley at his college graduation, smiling proudly beside her and Robert's memorial photo. Do you remember what you said to me that day? You thanked me for everything I'd done for you. You said you wanted to make me proud, to build something meaningful with your life. What happened to that young man? Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. I'll tell you what happened. You got comfortable. You got entitled. You started seeing my success as your birthright instead of something to earn or build upon. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as an obstacle between you and easy money. Margaret returned to her seat, her expression softening slightly. Bradley, I want to help you, but not in the way you think. What do you mean? I mean, I'm going to save your life, even though you don't deserve it. Vincent Torres is going to get his money, but not from you, and not in the way he expects. Bradley looked confused. I don't understand. Margaret pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Detective Martinez? Yes, it's Margaret Collins. I want you to proceed with the operation we discussed. Yes, tonight. Bradley is here with me now, so Torres won't be expecting any interference. Perfect. Thank you. She hung up and looked at Bradley's bewildered expression. Right now, Detective Martinez and several Chicago police officers are executing a warrant to search Vincent Torres's operations. They have enough evidence to charge him with illegal gambling, loan sharking, and extortion. By tomorrow morning, he'll be in custody. But what about the money I owe him? What money? According to the evidence the police will find, Vincent Torres has been running an illegal operation. Debts incurred through illegal gambling are not legally enforceable. You don't owe him anything. Bradley stared at her in amazement. You did all this for me? I did it to protect both of us. Vincent Torres was a threat to our family's safety. Eliminating that threat was the logical thing to do. For a moment, Bradley looked like he might cry. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to get this out of control. I was scared, and I made stupid decisions, and I said terrible things. Yes, you did. And now we need to discuss the consequences. The hope in Bradley's eyes dimmed. What consequences? Margaret pulled out another folder, this one containing documents from Harrison Webb's office. These are the papers for your new trust fund. Bradley brightened. A trust fund? Yes. You'll receive $2,000 per month for the next 5 years. That's enough to rent a modest apartment, buy groceries, and cover basic living expenses. If you want anything beyond that, you'll need to earn it. $2,000? But my allowance now is $15,000. Your allowance was a gift I chose to give you. This trust fund is what you've actually earned through your behavior and choices. Bradley's voice rose. You can't do this. I'm your son. You're right. You are my son, which is why you're getting anything at all. Anyone else who spoke about me the way you did, who put my life at risk the way you did, would get nothing. Margaret spread out the trust documents. Here are the terms. $2,000 per month for 5 years, with the possibility of increases based on specific achievements. If you complete a job training program or earn a professional certification, the amount increases to $3,000. If you maintain steady employment for a full year, it increases to $4,000. If you complete a college degree or start your own legitimate business, it increases to $5,000. What about the company? What about your estate? Collins Pharmaceuticals will be transitioned to a benefit corporation structure managed by the Collins Medical Foundation. Your inheritance will be these trust fund payments and whatever personal items you choose from the storage unit I'm establishing. Bradley shot to his feet. You can't give away my inheritance? It was never your inheritance, Bradley. It was my property to dispose of as I see fit. And I've decided to use it in ways that will help people who actually deserve help. This is insane. I'll challenge the will. I'll prove you're not competent to make these decisions. Margaret smiled for the first time that evening. Feel free to try. Dr. Hernandez has already completed a comprehensive mental and physical evaluation documenting my perfect cognitive function. Harrison Webb has prepared documentation showing that these decisions were made after careful consideration and legal consultation. Detective Martinez has compiled evidence of your character, your associations, and your threats against my safety. She leaned forward. Bradley, if you challenge this will, every detail of your gambling addiction, your debts to criminals, your casual discussions about my death, and your attempts to gather information about my security routines will become public record. Is that really how you want to be remembered? Bradley slumped back into his chair, the fight going out of him. So that's it? After everything we've been through? After 22 years of being your son? I get $2,000 a month and a storage unit? No, Bradley. You get something much more valuable than that. You get a chance to become the man I always hoped you could be. Margaret's voice softened again. The trust fund isn't a punishment. It's an opportunity. For the first time in your adult life, you'll have to work for what you want. You'll have to prove your worth through your actions instead of relying on your last name. You'll have to build something instead of just waiting to inherit something. What if I can't do it? What if I fail? Then you'll learn from failure, just like everyone else does. But I don't think you'll fail. Underneath all the entitlement and poor choices, you're still the little boy who used to ask me intelligent questions about my work. You're still Robert's son. You have potential. You've just never been forced to access it. Bradley sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the trust documents. Finally, he looked up at his mother. Do you hate me? Margaret considered the question carefully. No, I don't hate you. I'm disappointed in you. I'm hurt by the things you said and the way you've been living. But I don't hate you. Do you love me? I love the person you could become. Whether I can love the person you are right now, that's something you'll have to earn back. Bradley nodded slowly. What happens now? Now you have choices to make. You can sign these trust documents and accept this new arrangement, or you can walk away and try to make it on your own. You can fight me in court and air all your dirty laundry publicly, or you can accept this chance to start over. You can keep being the man I heard on those recordings, or you can become someone worthy of the Collins name. Margaret gathered up the photographs and documents, putting them back in their folders. Vincent Torres will be in jail by morning, so that threat is eliminated. Your credit card accounts have been closed and the balance is paid off, so you're starting with a clean financial slate. Your allowance will end at the end of this month, and your trust fund payments will begin the 1st of next month. She stood and walked toward the door, then paused. There's one more thing, Bradley. If you choose to accept this arrangement and try to rebuild your life, I'll be here to support you. Not financially beyond what's in the trust, but emotionally. I'll help you find job training programs, celebrate your achievements, and be proud of your progress. But if you choose to fight me or continue down the path you've been on, this conversation will be the last real one we ever have. Bradley looked up at her, and for a moment she saw a flicker of the little boy she remembered. Can I think about it? You have until tomorrow at noon to sign the trust documents. After that, the offer is withdrawn. Margaret left Bradley sitting, alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what might have been their last family dinner. As she walked upstairs to her bedroom, she felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. She'd given her son every opportunity to be better, and now she'd given him one last chance to prove he could change. Whether he took it or not was no longer her responsibility. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the estate grounds, wondering if she'd made the right choice. In 12 hours, Bradley would either sign the trust documents or walk away from his family forever. Either outcome would fundamentally change their relationship, but only one offered hope for redemption. At 6:30, her phone rang. "Detective." Martinez's voice was tired but satisfied. "Mrs. Collins, the operation was successful. We arrested Vincent Torres and 4 associates. We found detailed records of illegal gambling operations, loan sharking activities, and something particularly interesting, a file with your name on it." Margaret's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of file? Photos of your house, your daily routines, your car, even pictures of you entering and leaving your office building. There were also handwritten notes about your security system, your staff's schedules, and what looked like plans for a break-in." The implications hit her like a physical blow. He was planning to rob me? Worse than that. There were newspaper clippings about wealthy elderly people who'd died in apparent accidents or home invasions. "Mrs. Collins, I think Vincent Torres was planning to kill you and make it look like a burglary gone wrong. Your son's debt was just the excuse he needed to justify targeting you." Margaret sank into her bedside chair. Bradley's gambling problem hadn't just put him in danger, it had nearly cost her life. "There's more," Martinez continued. During questioning, one of Torres's associates revealed that they'd been pressuring Bradley to provide inside information about your security arrangements. He'd been feeding them details about your routine for months. Did Bradley know what they were planning? That's unclear. Torres's associate claims Bradley thought they were just interested in the best time to approach you about his debt. But, Mrs. Collins, intentionally or not, your son was helping them plan your murder. After hanging up, Margaret sat in stunned silence. The recorded conversations had hurt her feelings and revealed Bradley's character flaws. But this was different. This was proof that his actions had nearly gotten her killed. Whether he'd intended it or not, Bradley had been an accomplice to a murder plot. She called Harrison Webb and updated him on the police findings. "Harrison, I want those trust documents amended. Add a clause requiring Bradley to complete counseling. And demonstrate a pattern of responsible behavior before any payments begin." "Margaret, are you reconsidering the arrangement entirely?" "No, but I want guarantees that he understands the severity of what almost happened. He needs professional help, not just financial consequences." At 10 o'clock, Margaret received an unexpected visitor. Elena knocked on her office door looking nervous. "Mrs. Collins, there's a young woman here to see you. She says her name is Jessica Chen and that she needs to speak with you about Bradley." Margaret had never heard the name before, but something in Elena's tone suggested this wasn't a casual visit. "Send her in." Jessica Chen was probably 25, professionally dressed, with intelligent eyes that reminded Margaret of herself at that age. She entered the office with the confidence of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Mrs. Collins, thank you for seeing me. I'm Jessica Chen, and I work as a victim's advocate for people affected by gambling addiction. I'm here because your son contacted me this morning." Margaret gestured for Jessica to sit. "I wasn't aware that Bradley had reached out for help. He called our hotline at 3 a.m. He was in crisis, panicked, guilt-ridden, and apparently just learning about the full extent of what his gambling problem had set in motion. He told me about Vincent Torres, about the debt, and about a confrontation with you last night." "What exactly did he tell you?" Jessica pulled out a notebook. "He said that his gambling addiction had nearly gotten you killed, that he'd been providing information to dangerous people without understanding what they planned to do with it, and that he'd lost your trust and love through his own actions." Margaret felt a flicker of something. Not quite hope, but perhaps relief that Bradley was finally grasping the reality of the situation. "He also said," Jessica continued, "that you'd offered him a way forward, but that he didn't think he deserved." It. He asked me to help him understand whether someone like him could actually change, or if he was beyond redemption. What did you tell him? I told him that addiction makes people do terrible things, but it doesn't make them terrible people. I told him that change is possible, but only if someone is willing to do the hard work of recovery and making amends. Jessica leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Collins, your son is in a genuine crisis right now. He's finally seeing his behavior clearly, and the shame is overwhelming him. That's actually a good sign. It means his conscience isn't completely dead, but he needs professional help, and he needs it soon. Are you suggesting I should trust him again? I'm suggesting that if you're willing to give him another chance, you should do it with appropriate safeguards and professional support. Addiction recovery isn't something people can do alone, especially when there's been as much damage as Bradley has caused. Margaret considered this. What would professional support look like? Inpatient treatment for gambling addiction, followed by intensive outpatient therapy. Family counseling to address the relationship damage. Financial counseling to help him learn money management skills. And probably most importantly, community service work that would help him understand the impact of his choices on other people. How long would this process take? Recovery is lifelong, but the intensive phase usually takes 12 to 18 months. After that, ongoing support and accountability are crucial. Margaret thought about the trust documents waiting for Bradley's signature. Ms. Chen, would you be willing to work with my attorney to modify the terms of a trust agreement? I want to ensure that any financial support is tied to genuine progress in recovery. Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the most effective approaches. Financial consequences that are clearly tied to behavioral changes give people concrete motivation to stay in recovery. At 11:30, Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from Bradley. Mom, can I come see you before the deadline? I have something important to tell you. She texted back. Come now. We need to talk. 20 minutes later, Bradley walked into her office looking like he hadn't slept. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were red from crying. Behind him walked Jessica Chen, who nodded at Margaret. He asked me to come with him for support, Jessica explained. Bradley stood awkwardly near the door, as if unsure whether he was welcome to sit down. Mom, I need to tell you something that's going to make you hate me even more. Sit down, Bradley. He perched on the edge of a chair, his hands shaking. Detective Martinez called me this morning. He told me about the file Torres had on you, about the plans they were making. Mom, they were going to kill you. Margaret nodded. I know. But you don't know the worst part. You don't know that I gave them the information they needed to plan it. Bradley's voice broke. When Torres asked me about your routines, your security system, when you were home alone, I thought he was just trying to figure out the best time to approach you about my debt. But he wasn't. He was planning to murder you, and I helped him do it. Tears were streaming down his face now. I almost got my own mother killed because I was too selfish and stupid to think about what I was really doing. I was so focused on my own problems that I nearly became an accessory to murder. Margaret felt her heart breaking, not just for herself, but for the son who was finally understanding the full weight of his actions. Bradley, no, let me finish. I know you think I don't love you, that I only care about your money. And maybe that was true for a while. But Mom, the thought of you being dead because of my choices, it's destroying me. I can't live with that. Pulled out the trust documents, which were crumpled from being carried in his pocket. I don't deserve this second chance. I don't deserve your forgiveness or your help or even your time. But I'm signing these papers because maybe, if I work really hard and get the help I need, someday I can become someone who does deserve them. Bradley signed each page with shaking hands, then looked up at his mother. I'm going to do everything, Ms. Chen suggested. The treatment, the therapy, the community service. Not because I have to, but because I need to become someone different than who I am right now. Margaret stood and walked to her son, who immediately stood as well. For a moment, they just looked at each other. A 73-year-old woman who'd built an empire and a 22-year-old man who'd nearly destroyed everything she'd worked for. Then Margaret did something she hadn't done in months. She hugged her son. "I don't hate you, Bradley. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt, and I'm still processing everything that's happened. But I don't hate you." Bradley collapsed into her embrace, sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything." "I know you are, and now you're going to prove it." Jessica Chen stood and handed Margaret a folder. "These are treatment program options and therapy recommendations. With your permission, I'd like to help coordinate Bradley's recovery plan with the trust requirements." Over the next 2 hours, they worked out a comprehensive plan. Bradley would enter a 60-day inpatient treatment program immediately. Upon completion, he would begin intensive outpatient therapy 3 times per week. His trust fund payments would be suspended during treatment and would only begin once he'd completed 90 days of continuous sobriety and therapy attendance. The trust terms were further modified to include requirements for community service, job training, and regular drug and alcohol testing. Most importantly, Bradley would have no contact with anyone from his previous social circle and would be required to live in supervised housing for the first year of recovery. "This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done," Margaret told her son as they finalized the arrangements. "Good," Bradley replied. "Easy is what got me into this mess." As Jessica Chen prepared to drive Bradley to the treatment facility, Margaret pulled her son aside for a private moment. "Bradley, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about gambling addiction or poor financial choices. This is about the kind of person you want to be. Recovery will teach you coping skills and help you understand your addiction, but becoming someone worthy of trust and respect, that's work you'll have to do every day for the rest of your life." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because in 18 months, when your intensive treatment is complete, you'll still be my son. But whether you'll be someone I can be proud of, someone I can trust, someone I can love without reservation, that depends entirely on the choices you make during recovery." Bradley nodded. "I won't let you down again." "Don't make me promises, Bradley. Make yourself into someone who doesn't need to make promises because their actions speak for themselves." As she watched Jessica's car disappear down the driveway, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the naive hope of a mother who couldn't see her child's flaws, but the cautious hope of someone who'd seen the first. Genuine signs of remorse and commitment to change. 2 years later, Margaret Collins stood in the auditorium of Chicago Community College, watching her son receive his certificate in addiction counseling. Bradley had not only completed his own recovery program, but had decided to dedicate his life to helping others struggling with gambling addiction. His trust fund payments had resumed after his first year of sobriety, but he'd chosen to live modestly, using most of the money to support his education and volunteer work. He'd been sober for 26 months, had maintained steady employment at a nonprofit organization, and had rebuilt relationships with family members he'd hurt during his addiction. Most importantly, he'd become someone Margaret could genuinely respect and love without reservation. After the ceremony, Bradley approached her with his girlfriend Sarah, a social worker he'd met during his community service work. "Mom, I have something to tell you," he said, his voice nervous but excited. "What is it?" "Sarah and I are engaged, and we want to ask if you'd consider letting us have the wedding reception at the house." Margaret looked at her son. Really looked. At him. Gone was the entitled, desperate young man who'd nearly gotten her killed. In his place stood someone she recognized as Robert's son and her own. Someone who'd found purpose in helping others, who'd learned the value of earning what he wanted, and who'd discovered that true wealth came from meaningful relationships and important work. "I'd be honored to host your wedding reception," she said, embracing them both. As they walked out of the auditorium together, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd saved her son's life by cutting off his access to easy money, but more importantly, she'd saved his soul by forcing him to find his own way forward. The Collins fortune would still go to charity when she died, but now she knew that wouldn't be a loss for Bradley. He'd learned to build something meaningful with his own hands, his own mind, and his own heart. That was an inheritance worth more than any amount of money. And Margaret Collins, pharmaceutical heiress and loving mother, finally felt like she'd succeeded at the job that mattered most. 5 years had passed since Margaret Collins had overheard those devastating words at the country club, and the woman who now sat in her office bore little resemblance to the heartbroken mother who had discovered her son's true feelings. At 78, Margaret had not only survived the betrayal, she had thrived in ways she never expected. The Collins Medical Foundation had become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the Midwest. Under Margaret's expanded vision, it now operated 12 free clinics across Illinois, provided full scholarships to over 300 medical students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and funded breakthrough research into rare diseases that major pharmaceutical companies had deemed unprofitable. But perhaps most surprisingly, Margaret had found love again. Dr. Samuel Martinez, a retired cardiologist who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier, had joined the foundation's board of directors 18 months ago. At 75, Samuel possessed the same passion for helping others that had driven Margaret's entire career. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep understanding of loss and resilience. This morning, Margaret was reviewing applications for the Foundation's newest initiative, a program that would provide free addiction counseling and treatment to families affected by gambling disorders. The irony wasn't lost on her that her son's destructive choices had inspired her to help other families facing similar crises. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. Bradley entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the confident smile of someone who had genuinely earned his place in the world. Now 27, Bradley had completed not only his addiction counseling certification, but had also earned a master's degree in social work. He'd been the Foundation's Director of Family Services for the past year, overseeing programs that helped families navigate the medical system and access resources they couldn't afford on their own. "Morning, Mom. Samuel asked me to bring you this." He set down a cup of her favorite Ethiopian blend. "He's downstairs reviewing the clinic expansion proposals with the architects." Margaret accepted the coffee gratefully. Working alongside Samuel had taught her to appreciate small gestures of care, something she'd forgotten during the years of focusing solely on business and trying to connect with an uninterested son. "How did the Thompson family interview go yesterday?" she asked. Bradley's expression grew serious. "Heartbreaking but hopeful. Their 8-year-old daughter needs a liver transplant, and they've already exhausted their savings on medical bills. The father lost his job because he's been spending so much time at the hospital. Are we able to help them?" "Completely. The foundation will cover all transplant-related expenses not handled by insurance, plus living expenses for 6 months while their daughter recovers. I also connected them with the Marino family house so they can stay near the hospital without worrying about accommodation costs." Margaret felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from solving problems and changing lives. "Excellent work. What's our caseload looking like this month?" "We're helping 43 families currently, with 12 new applications pending. Review. The Gambling Addiction Counseling Program has a waiting list of 32 people." Bradley set down his own coffee and looked directly at his mother. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Yesterday, when I was counseling the Hendricks family about their teenager's gambling problem, the father asked me how I got into this work. I told him the truth, that my own gambling addiction had nearly destroyed my family, and that working with people facing similar struggles was my way of making amends." Margaret nodded. This wasn't the first time Bradley had shared his story with clients. His willingness to be vulnerable about his past had proven to be one of his greatest strengths as a counselor. "He asked me something that's been bothering me ever since," Bradley continued. He wanted to know if I thought you'd ever really forgiven me, not just accepted my recovery or been proud of my progress, but actually forgiven me for the person I was and the things I did. The question hung in the air between them. Margaret had been waiting for this conversation for months, sensing that Bradley was still carrying guilt that professional therapy hadn't fully resolved. What did you tell him? I told him I wasn't sure. I know you're proud of who I've become, and I know you love me now. But sometimes I wonder if you still see that selfish, entitled kid when you look at me. If you still remember me calling you an old bag, or think about how I nearly got you killed. Margaret set down her coffee and studied her son's face. The boy who had casually discussed her death with his friends was gone, replaced by a man who carried the weight of his past actions, but didn't let them define his future. Bradley, do you want me to forget what happened? The question surprised him. I don't know. Part of me does, but part of me thinks I deserve to live with that. Guilt forever. That's exactly why I haven't brought this up before. You needed to process your own feelings about your past before we could address mine. Margaret stood and walked to the window overlooking the Foundation's main clinic. Below, she could see families entering and leaving, people whose lives were being changed by the work her son now devoted himself to. I forgave you completely the day you graduated from your addiction counseling program. Not because you'd earned it through your recovery, but because holding on to anger and hurt was keeping me from fully appreciating who you'd become. She turned back to Bradley, who was staring at her in surprise. But I didn't tell you because forgiveness isn't something you give to someone else, it's something you do for yourself. You needed to learn to forgive yourself, to accept that people can change fundamentally, and to understand that your past doesn't have to determine your future. Bradley's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Do you really not think about it anymore? Oh, I think about it all the time, but not the way you imagine. I think about how grateful I am that your crisis forced me to reevaluate my priorities. I think about how your recovery showed me what real courage looks like. I think about how your willingness to help other families has given new meaning to everything I've built. Margaret returned to her desk and pulled out a thick folder. I think about it every time I review applications for our gambling addiction programs. Every time I see you counsel a family in crisis. Every time I watch you choose service over self-interest. She handed him the folder. Which brings me to something I've been wanting to discuss with you. Bradley opened the folder and found legal documents, financial projections, and organizational charts. At the top was a memo titled Succession Planning for the Collins Medical Foundation. Mom, what is this? It's my retirement plan. Next year I'll be 79. Samuel and I want to travel, to spend time together without the constant demands of running a major foundation. We want to see the world while we're still healthy enough to enjoy it. Bradley scanned the documents, his expression growing more amazed with each page. You want me to become executive director? I want you to take over leadership of the foundation, yes, but not because you're my son, because over the past 3 years, you've proven yourself to be an exceptional leader, a gifted counselor, and someone who truly understands the mission we're trying to accomplish. The documents outlined a comprehensive transition plan. Bradley would spend the next year working directly with Margaret to learn the administrative and fundraising aspects of foundation management. He would take increasing responsibility for strategic decisions and board communications. By his 30th birthday, he would be fully in charge of an organization with an annual budget of $45 million. I don't know what to say. Say. You'll think about it carefully. This isn't charity or nepotism, Bradley. This is a job offer for someone I believe can take the foundation to the next level. But it's also a massive responsibility. You'd be accountable for the livelihoods of over 200 employees and the well-being of thousands of families who depend on our services. Bradley set the folder aside and looked at his mother with an expression she recognized from his childhood. The look he'd had when she first explained how her medications helped people live better lives. Mom, Can I ask you something? When you first changed your will and cut me out of your inheritance, did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Margaret considered the question. Honestly? No. When I made those changes, I was focused on protecting your life and preserving my legacy. I hoped you might eventually get help for your gambling problem, but I never imagined you'd become someone who could run the foundation. What changed your mind? You did. Not through grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but through consistent choices. Every day for 5 years, you've chosen service over selfishness, growth over comfort, accountability over excuses. You've become someone I not only love as my son, but someone I respect as a colleague and trust as a leader. Bradley stood and paced to the window, looking down at the same scene his mother had observed minutes earlier. There's something I need to tell you before I can accept this offer. Sarah and I have been talking about starting a family. If I take over the foundation, I want to make sure I can balance those responsibilities with being the kind of father my children deserve. Margaret smiled. Bradley, do you know what I was doing the morning you were born? Working, probably. I was in a board meeting, trying to close a deal with a European distributor. When the contractions started, I finished the presentation before going to the hospital. I thought dedication meant never stepping away from work, never showing weakness, never prioritizing family over business. She joined him at the window. You know what I learned? The most successful leaders are the ones who understand that having something more important than work makes them better at their job, not worse. Your children won't be a distraction from your work at the foundation. They'll be the reason you baffi. Work harder to make the world better. Bradley turned to face her. Mom, I want to accept the offer, but I have one condition. What's that? I want you to stay involved as chairman emeritus, not in day-to-day operations, but as an advisor and mentor. I've learned more about leadership from watching you handle the crisis of my addiction than I learned in 2 years of graduate school. I don't want to lose access to that wisdom. Margaret felt a warmth spreading through her chest, not the professional satisfaction of a successful negotiation, but the deep contentment of a mother who had finally found her way back to her child. I accept your condition. Samuel and I will travel, but will always be available when you need guidance or support. They spent the next hour going through the transition timeline, discussing potential challenges and identifying key relationships Bradley would need to develop with donors, board members, and community partners. As they worked, Margaret found herself marveling at the conversation they were having. 5 years ago, she couldn't trust Bradley with his own monthly allowance. Now they were planning how he would manage an organization that affected thousands of lives. There's one more thing, Margaret said as they finished reviewing the documents. Samuel has asked me to marry him. Bradley's face lit up with genuine happiness. Mom, that's wonderful. When? We're thinking of a small ceremony this fall, maybe in the garden. We're both too old for a big wedding, but we want to celebrate with the people who matter most to us. I'm so happy for you. Samuel's a good man. He is, and he's excited about working with you during the transition. He thinks you have excellent instincts for organizational leadership. Bradley gathered up the succession planning documents. I'll review these thoroughly and give you my official answer by the end of the week. But Mom, I want you to know, regardless of whether I take this job, the past 5 years have been the best of my life. Not because of my recovery or my career success, but because I finally have a relationship with my mother built on honesty and mutual respect. Margaret felt tears threatening for the second time that morning. They've been the best years of my life, too. After Bradley left, Margaret sat alone in her office, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo from Bradley and Sarah's wedding reception 2 years earlier. In the picture, she was dancing with her son in the garden of the family estate, both of them laughing at something Samuel had said, from the sidelines. Looking at that photo now, Margaret could barely remember the hurt and anger she'd felt when she first overheard Bradley's cruel words about her death. That pain had been transformed into something beautiful, a stronger relationship with her son, an expanded mission for her foundation, and a second chance at love with Samuel. She'd learned that sometimes the most devastating betrayals create opportunities for the most meaningful redemption, that cutting someone off from unearned privileges can free them to discover their real potential. That love sometimes means refusing to enable destructive behavior, even when it breaks your heart. Most importantly, she'd learned that it's never too late to start over, whether you're 27 and recovering from addiction or 78 and falling in love again. Margaret Collins had thought her son's betrayal was the end of their story. Instead, it had been the beginning of the best chapter of both their lives. 10 years after that life-changing evening at the country club, Margaret Collins Martinez stood in her garden on a crisp October morning, watching her 3-year-old granddaughter, Emma, chase butterflies among the autumn flowers. At 83, Margaret moved more slowly than she once had, but her mind remained sharp and her purpose clear. The garden had been transformed since Samuel joined her life 7 years ago. What was once a formal English landscape was now a therapeutic space designed for the families who stayed at the Collins Family Recovery Center, the residential facility that had been built on the eastern portion of the estate. Emma's laughter drew Margaret's attention back to the present. The little girl had inherited Bradley's curiosity and Sarah's gentle nature, creating a perfect combination of wonder and kindness. Watching her granddaughter explore the world with such joy had given Margaret a new perspective on legacy, one that went far beyond financial inheritance or charitable foundations. "Grandma Maggie, look!" Emma held up a bright orange leaf, her face glowing with the excitement of discovery. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. What do you think makes it that color?" "Magic," Emma declared with the absolute certainty that only 3-year-olds possess. Margaret smiled, remembering similar conversations with Bradley when he was Emma's age. The difference was that now she understood the importance of being present for these moments, rather than mentally reviewing pharmaceutical patents while pretending to listen. "Mom, there you are." Bradley approached from the house, carrying 18-month-old Robert, named after his grandfather, who was contentedly munching on a teething biscuit. "Sarah's looking for you. The documentary crew wants to do the final interview before they wrap filming." Margaret had reluctantly agreed to participate in a documentary about family addiction recovery after the Collins Foundation's gambling addiction program had gained national recognition. The filmmaker, Dr. Lisa Chang, was creating a series about families who had overcome devastating conflicts through professional intervention and mutual commitment to change. "Do I have to?" Margaret asked, only half joking. "I'm much more comfortable behind the scenes. You promised Dr. Chang you'd do this interview. Besides, our story might help other families who are going through similar situations." Bradley was right, of course. Over the past decade, the foundation had received thousands of letters from families struggling with addiction, financial manipulation, and the breakdown of trust between parents and adult children. Margaret's story had become a case study in several university social work programs, demonstrating how firm boundaries and conditional support could create space for genuine recovery. As they walked toward the house, Margaret reflected on how dramatically their family dynamic had changed. Bradley, now 32, had been leading the Collins Foundation for 3 years with remarkable success. Under his leadership, the organization expanded to operate in 6 states, providing comprehensive support services for families dealing with medical crises, addiction, and financial hardship. More importantly, he had become the father Margaret always hoped he could be. His relationship with Sarah was built on honesty, mutual support, and shared values. Nothing like the entitled, superficial connections he had pursued in his 20s. His children would grow up understanding that love meant both care and accountability. Inside, the documentary crew had set up in the library where Margaret kept her favorite family photos and awards from various medical organizations. Dr. Chang, a petite woman with an intense but warm presence, was reviewing her notes while the camera, Operators adjusted their equipment. Mrs. Collins Martinez, thank you for making time for this final interview. I know you prefer to stay out of the spotlight. Please, call me Margaret. And you're right. I've never been comfortable with personal publicity, but if our experience can help other families, then the discomfort is worth it. Dr. Chang settled into the chair across from Margaret, her expression thoughtful. Over the past 6 months, I've interviewed dozens of family members, treatment professionals, and people who've worked with your foundation. What strikes me most is how many people describe your response to Bradley's betrayal as both devastating and ultimately transformative. Can you talk about that paradox? Margaret considered the question carefully. She'd been asked variations of it many times over the years, but the documentary format required a more comprehensive answer. When I first overheard Bradley talking about my death so casually, I felt like I was mourning the loss of 2 people, the son I thought I had raised and the woman I thought I had been as a mother. The devastation was complete. She paused, looking at a photo of Bradley's graduation from his master's program. But devastation creates space for rebuilding, doesn't it? When everything you believed about a relationship is destroyed, you have the opportunity to start over with honesty instead of assumptions. Some parents in similar situations choose to cut off contact entirely. Others continue enabling destructive behavior out of fear or guilt. What made you choose the middle path of conditional support? I chose it because I realized that unconditional financial support was actually a form of harm. By removing consequences from Bradley's choices, I was preventing him from developing the skills he needed to become a functional adult. Margaret's voice grew stronger as she spoke. Love isn't about protecting someone from the results of their actions. Real love is about creating conditions where someone can discover their best self, even if that process is painful for both of you. Dr. Chang leaned forward. The private investigator you hired discovered that Bradley's gambling debts had potentially put your life in danger. How did that revelation change your perspective on the situation? It confirmed that my instincts were correct. Bradley needed professional help, not financial rescue. But it also showed me how quickly enabling behavior can escalate into genuinely dangerous situations. If I had continued providing unlimited financial support, I might have indirectly funded my own murder. The stark reality of that statement hung in the air. Even 10 years later, Margaret sometimes marveled at how close she had come to being killed as a result of her son's addiction. Let's talk about the recovery process. What was the most difficult part of rebuilding your relationship with Bradley? Margaret thought about the early months of Bradley's treatment, when their only contact was through supervised family therapy sessions. The most difficult part was learning to trust my own judgment again. For so long, I had made excuses for Bradley's behavior, convinced myself that his problems were temporary or that my love alone could fix them. During his recovery, I had to learn to base my responses on his actions rather than my hopes. Can you give me an example? About 6 months into his treatment, Bradley called me asking for money to buy Christmas gifts for his treatment center roommates. It seemed like a generous, thoughtful gesture, exactly the kind of behavior I wanted to encourage. But when I talked to his counselor, I learned that gift-giving was a common manipulation strategy among people in early recovery. They use generosity to rebuild trust while still avoiding genuine accountability. Margaret smiled at the memory. I told Bradley that if he wanted to give gifts, he could make them by hand or write personal letters. It was a small thing, but it taught both of us that recovery meant changing patterns of thinking, not just abstaining from gambling. Dr. Chang consulted her notes. Your foundation now has a family recovery program that serves hundreds of families annually. How does your personal experience inform that work? Every policy we've developed comes from something we learned during Bradley's recovery. Our requirement that family members participate in their own counseling. Our insistence on graduated privileges rather than immediate trust. Our focus on long-term behavioral change rather than short-term compliance. All of that grew out of our experience. Margaret gestured toward the window, where the Collins Family Recovery Center was visible through the trees. We've learned that addiction affects entire family systems, not just the person with the primary problem. Parents need to recover from enabling behaviors. Siblings need to process their own anger and resentment. And everyone needs to learn new ways of relating to each other. What would you say to parents who are currently facing similar situations with their adult children? Margaret's expression grew serious. I would tell them that love requires courage. It takes courage to stop enabling destructive behavior, even when your child is angry with you. It takes courage to maintain boundaries when every instinct tells you to rescue them. And it takes courage to accept that you can't control another person's choices, even when that person is your child. She paused, thinking about the hundreds of families the Foundation had worked with over the years. But I would also tell them that transformation is possible, not just for their children, but for themselves. Some of the strongest, most insightful people I know are parents who have learned to love their children in healthier ways. Dr. Chung glanced toward the window, where Bradley could be seen playing with his children in the garden. How do you think this experience has influenced Bradley as a father? He's intentional in ways that I never was. He understands that children need both love and limits, that privilege without responsibility creates entitled adults, and that the best gift you can give your children is teaching them to find meaning through service to others. Margaret's voice filled with pride. Emma and Robert will grow up knowing that their grandfather built something meaningful, that their grandmother dedicated her life to helping others, and that their father overcame serious problems through hard work and personal growth. That's a legacy worth having. What do you want people to take away from your family's story? Margaret considered the question for a long moment. I want them to understand that it's never too late to change direction, either as a parent or as a child. I was 73 when I discovered that my approach to loving Bradley was actually harmful to both of us. He was 22 when he realized that his entire life philosophy was destructive. But we were both willing to do the difficult work of changing. She looked directly into the camera. I also want them to know that cutting someone off from unearned privileges isn't abandonment. It's the most loving thing you can do when someone's behavior is self-destructive. Sometimes people need to experience real consequences before they can make different choices. Dr. Chang made a few final notes. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Margaret thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. The betrayal, the fear, the anger, the slow rebuilding of trust. And finally, the joy of watching Bradley become someone she could genuinely respect and admire. I want people to know that this story isn't really about money or inheritance. It's about what we owe each other as family members. We owe each other honesty, accountability, and the kind of love that encourages growth rather than enabling stagnation. She smiled, thinking about Samuel, who was probably napping in his favorite chair, and about Bradley and Sarah, who had created a marriage based on mutual respect and shared values. Most importantly, I want people to understand that some of life's most painful experiences can become the foundation for its most meaningful achievements. Bradley's addiction crisis forced our family to rebuild itself on honesty instead of assumptions, boundaries instead of enabling, and earned trust instead of blind faith. We're all better people because of what we went through. As the documentary crew packed up their equipment, Margaret walked back to the garden where her family was gathered. Samuel had awakened from his nap and was teaching Emma how to identify different types of trees. Bradley and Sarah were sitting on a bench, watching Robert take his first tentative steps across the grass. This was the life that had emerged from the ashes of that devastating evening 10 years ago. Not the life Margaret had planned or expected, but a richer, more authentic life than she could have imagined. Bradley looked up as she approached. How did the interview go? Fine. Dr. Chang asked good questions. Are you glad you did it? Margaret considered the question. Yes, I think I am. If our story helps even one family avoid the mistakes we made or find the courage to make necessary changes, then the discomfort was worth it. She sat down beside them and watched her granddaughter's delighted exploration of the world around her. Emma would grow up in a family that valued honesty, personal responsibility, and service to others. She would inherit not just financial security, but a legacy of meaningful work and healthy relationships. That evening, as Margaret and Samuel sat on their bedroom balcony watching the sunset, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. "Any regrets?" Samuel asked, as if reading her thoughts. Margaret considered the question seriously. "I regret that it took a crisis for Bradley and me to build an honest relationship. I regret that I enabled his destructive behavior for as long as I did. But I don't regret the choices I made once I understood what was really happening." "What? About the inheritance changes? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd left everything to him originally?" "I know what would have happened. Bradley would have inherited hundreds of millions of dollars with no understanding of responsibility or meaning. He would have destroyed everything I built, squandered resources that could have helped thousands of people, and never discovered his own capacity for meaningful work." Margaret took Samuel's hand, marveling at how natural it felt to share her thoughts with someone who truly understood her values. Instead, he inherited something much more valuable, the knowledge that he could overcome serious problems, build something meaningful, and earn the respect of people he cares about. That's the kind of inheritance that actually changes lives. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Margaret Collins Martinez felt a deep sense of contentment. She had saved her son's life by refusing to enable his destruction. She had preserved her legacy by ensuring it would be managed by someone who truly understood its purpose. And she had discovered that love sometimes requires the courage to say no, even when saying yes would be easier. The fortune she had built would continue serving others long after she was gone. But more importantly, the values she had fought to instill in Bradley would be passed on to Emma and Robert, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond money or organizations. Margaret had learned that the most valuable inheritance isn't what you leave to your children, it's what you inspire them to become. And by that measure, her life had been a complete success. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.